attack on Manhattan's Upper East Side. The victim, New York's former governor David Paterson. The NYPD releasing these images overnight of the 5 suspects in the attack. And police say they are believed to be teenagers.
So an altercation took place between a gang of teenagers and a former governor of New York right outside that McDonald's. And while gang violence has been a growing problem here for months, things may be approaching the point of no return. Because if a former governor can't walk down the streets here safely, what chance do the rest of us have?
Police are searching for several suspects who they say assaulted former New York Governor David Paterson and his son.
We're hearing from police that the former governor was out here with his stepson and they were walking their dog when they got attacked. You'll notice that there's one woman and it appears to be 4 other males there.
Maybe they didn't know who he was, but even still it's wrong to just attack innocent people.
I think it's awful. I mean, this is ridiculous. You know, there's got to be better.
The number of teen girls using guns is growing, and now female crime fighters are working to bring them to justice and turn their lives around. What's going on here?
I love you, babe.
Some of them are afraid. Some of them are forced to do it. Some of them just, are curious. They like the bad boys, so they want to run in those circles to see what it's like. They may not necessarily be like that, but it's too late once you get caught up in it.
A lot of people are questioning what happened, why those people would do this. But again, police are telling us they're looking for 5 people, all believed to be teenagers. They say after this attack yesterday, all 5 of them ran from the scene.
So 2 teens have been arrested in what many are calling a gang-related altercation with a former governor. But what nobody's talking about is that teenage gang activity, it's the next logical step down the road of lawlessness being paved by our justice system, which has had no problem tolerating adult gang violence for quite some time at levels that just seem to be getting worse every single month. And not only has it recently come out that gangs are now taking over New York City's shelters that house asylum seekers, smuggling weapons and contraband inside right under the noses of humanitarian care workers, but we just had a crime wave of gang-related attacks in Central Park where robberies are now up 104% this year. A mind-blowing statistic in what many criminal sympathizers love to tell us is the safest big city in America, where critics say unreported and unprosecuted crime which gets swept under the rug is how New York earns that bragging right, even though assaults here are up 40% over the last 5 years. But the real reason all this gang violence is happening, sparing not even former leaders of our state, is because we live in a no-consequences environment, where those arrested for assaulting others are typically released, even if caught with illegal weapons. Plus, an environment that gives every criminal a get-out-of-jail-free card will predictably be a place that lends itself to the formation and growth of gangs, something that's now affecting members of our society who are so young they have no idea how the mistakes they're making today might completely destroy their futures. And that's why, as you're about to see, they're not afraid of anyone, not even a former governor of our state. So this right here is the McDonald's where the former governor of New York and his stepson had an altercation with teenage gangsters that led to them visiting the ER. Luckily, no one was seriously injured and everyone seems to be okay. But this attack raises serious safety concerns in the minds of average residents who aren't former governors, who think to themselves, if the law can't protect the former governor, what chance do I have?
1 woman with purple braids and 4 men, all believed to be in their late teens or early 20s. According to the NYPD, they're wanted for attacking former Governor David Paterson and his 20-year-old stepson when the 2 were walking on...
So here we have images from security cameras at one of the buildings over here that show us exactly who these individuals were. Probably the security cameras right here on this deli next door. They're pointed right at the entrance. Now, the former governor of New York, David Paterson, he's 70 years old and he is legally blind. At the time of the altercation, he was out walking his dog and he was accompanied by his 20-year-old stepson. And as you can see, we're in a pretty busy area of town. Right over here is 96th Street. You've got the Q train at 2nd Avenue. It's a busy area with lots of other businesses and a lot of foot traffic. Not the kind of place you'd expect something to go wrong. But things did go wrong. Now, apparently, the former governor and his stepson stood their ground in the face of these thugs. And although it's incredibly frightening to think that somebody who is a former governor of our state isn't really safe walking down the streets. Yes, they're 70 years old, but this attack just came out of nowhere. It wasn't even a robbery attempt. It was just senseless violence against somebody that the thugs didn't think would be able to pose much of a problem for them. But as you're about to see from the security camera footage, the incident that took place here was triggered by an altercation between the governor, his stepson, and these thugs that happened just moments before.
Police tell us it was around 8:35 in the evening when the former governor of New York and his stepson were out here walking around. They say that they saw some teens on a fire escape and then told them to get down. And after that, sources say those teens attacked 70-year-old Paterson and 20-year-old Anthony Sliwa. Paterson.
So this is the point in our story where things take a controversial turn, because according to NBC, the whole reason this went down is because of things that were said between these two groups beforehand. But still, words are never an excuse to get physical with somebody else. Apparently, the former governor and his stepson confronted the group when they saw them scaling a fire escape, which you're not supposed to use unless there's an emergency. Maybe the fire escape was the one for their apartment, or maybe they were trying to enter an apartment through the window. And apparently the exchange that happened between these two groups is what set the whole thing off. Not that there's any excuse for it, but controversially, some people will conclude that had the former governor and his stepson not confronted these folks, nothing would have happened. But that would be an incorrect conclusion, because the reason this whole situation even transpired was set in stone long before the former governor even left his house. And it's because we live in a lawless society. A society where people frequently break the law, oftentimes right in front of our police, knowing that nothing is going to happen to them because there aren't any consequences. Now, in a law-abiding society, if you're doing something dumb, some minor infraction, like you're on your fire escape and someone else calls you out for it, you'll stop because you don't want to be in trouble. You don't want to look like a scofflaw. In a law-abiding society, the citizenry can politely police itself, and law-abiding people need not fear unpredictable backlash from thugs just for pointing out the fact that someone might be doing something wrong and potentially dangerous. But in a place where nobody cares about the law, the opposite's going to happen, which it did right here. And that's because 2024 New York City, even though it might be the safest big city in the world, that's obviously not the case at 9 p.m. on a Friday night, which is when this all went down.
Now, as they're recovering, people in this area are talking about what happened, and they tell us they're struggling to understand why this happened.
For a public figure to be walking and get attacked for no reason, for just walking his dog, I'm sure that people that did that, the teenagers, didn't know who he was. This can happen to anyone.
So these thugs who went after the governor and his stepson, they probably had no idea who he was. They were probably just reacting a gut, visceral reaction to being called out for doing something up on their fire escape. A gut reaction critics say would be less common if people who did stuff like this wound up in jail. But you see this gentleman right here, this is Curtis Sliwa, and he's actually the father of the governor's stepson. And he had some interesting words about this entire situation. He says that the likely punishment anybody involved in this is going to receive is going to be a slap on the wrist at most, because that's what this city has a history of doing. There's the former governor.
Hey, how are you?
How are you?
I'm good.
Glad you're okay? You're feeling good?
Yeah, I'm feeling pretty good.
All right. This is the dog you were walking the other day?
Yep.
All right. Take care. You know, the former governor is a real New Yorker. He's not letting any of this faze him. He's continuing to live his life in spite of what's happening all around us. Good on him. Now, two of the folks you see here, they've been arrested and they're being charged with second-degree assault, which carries a maximum sentence of 7 years, and it's a felony. But remember, they're teenagers. The law might not crack down on them the same way as it would as an adult. Plus, this is New York, where a lot of times these charges get dismissed or downgraded, especially if it's someone's first offense. But the neighbors here are totally disgusted with what went down in what is supposed to be a safe, busy part of town.
Maybe they didn't know who he was, but even still, it's wrong to just attack innocent people.
I think it's awful. I mean, this is ridiculous. You know, there's got to be better.
It's a shame what's going on with our elderly people, because you're here with the...
So the neighbors here, they bring up some interesting points, and their suspicions are probably correct that these teenagers had no idea who the former governor was, but they also bring up the fact that this situation of elderly folks in this city being looked at as targets, it's a pattern that's been going on for quite some time. Definitely not the types of headlines we should have to read, no siree. But sadly, in a lawless society, this type of thing just becomes more and more common because there are no consequences, and what do criminals and thugs do? They look for the path of least resistance, which oftentimes is somebody who appears defenseless, putting them at risk for backpack snatchings, purse snatchings, phone snatchings. It's horrible. And although crime against the defenseless is an obvious byproduct of a lawless environment, another byproduct is the rising prevalence of teenage gang activity, where we're seeing some of the youngest members of our society join up with hardcore hardcore criminals, which, as you're about to see, is another problem in the city that is going completely out of control. So here we are in a residential neighborhood not too far from that McDonald's where this all went down, and what you see here are normal looking apartments, just like the one that these gang members were hanging out in that they then left to go and have an altercation with a former elected official. And although much of what you see around here might look rather unassuming, rather unsuspecting, some of these places might be criminal compounds.
19-year-old Brianna Portalatin, 8 months pregnant, was among other suspects brought out from a sort of criminal commune in a Bronx apartment. The expectant mom with a rap sheet is allegedly one of 20 members of the notorious Slaughtery gang, indicted in 14.
So here we get a look at some police that are raiding various gang hideouts throughout the city, but what they're finding inside some of these apartments are a high number of teenagers that have joined up with criminals. And these are the last people you'd expect to want to live a life of crime. They haven't even lived life yet they're now putting their futures in grave danger without even realize it by palling around with the wrong crowd. And if our city has teenagers getting hauled out of apartments like this during police raids, think about what that means. These are people who also may be going to high school, which is why stories like this are no surprise, with record numbers of kids feeling unsafe as they go to learn and prepare for the future. One student is quoted as saying that she's already heard classmates within the first 2 weeks of this school year claiming to be gang members, demanding money and making threats like, "I will pop you." And this isn't some sort of joke. It's reality throughout our public school system, which is supposed to be a safe place for people to learn and improve their lives. But if we've got record numbers of teenagers bringing weapons into the neighborhoods where they live, it only makes sense that those weapons, unfortunately, are gonna make their way to schools along with books and lunches, and it's just terrible. But because of the lawless environment that we're all living in, we see the same thing happening in our neighborhoods. We see the same thing happening at our city-run homeless shelters, and now we're seeing it in our schools. It's all a logical progression of an awful situation that needs to change. But this brings up a big question. Why are teenagers, girls in many cases, joining these gangs?
Trailblazing Bronx DA Darcel Clark says there are many reasons why they're seeing girls get seduced by the gang lifestyle.
Some of them are afraid. Some of them are forced to do it. Some of them just, are curious. They like the bad boys, so they want to run in those circles to see what it's like.
Poverty and unstable.
So the only way for people to feel like this and independently come to these types of conclusions that they have to join a gang to get ahead in life is if our society is completely falling apart before our eyes. And the reason that our homes, neighborhoods, and schools are turning out like this is because we as a society aren't willing to crack down on it. And it seems like our legal system just doesn't have the willpower to put somebody behind bars when they do something that deserves their presence in a jail cell. And this is causing problems basically everywhere. We wouldn't have such a massive epidemic of store closures over things like shoplifting in this city if people who stole were in jail. Our mental health crisis, which is infecting our streets and hurting people, wouldn't be what it is if gangs couldn't make money selling things to people that are illegal. And yes, this news report does mention poverty as one of the factors that may determine the choices someone makes and may determine how susceptible they are to getting sucked into the criminal underworld. But remember, as a progressive society, New York doesn't have any solutions for lifting people up out of poverty, because by allowing crime, they're keeping people stuck in it, sometimes forever.
Poverty and unstable family and mental health issues are also factors, says clinical social worker Dr. LaShawn Paul, who treats teen girls at risk.
I think that the sooner that we get intervention for these girls, the better, before they become the lead, before they become...
So she is 100% correct. We need a system of intervention that will get into someone's life and stop them from doing things that are wrong. And we used to have that. It used to be our legal system, but we've turned it into something that no longer functions as a source of intervention in people's lives. And the reason our streets are so unsafe is because we've decided that things like assault shouldn't send people to jail. So they don't. And now you've got more assaults in this city. They're up 40% over 5 years ago. That's why a former governor can't walk down a sidewalk or a street here without being in danger from people who fear nothing. There's nothing to fear. We've taken it away, emboldening the criminal elements that are prepared perpetuating now every single level of our society down to our teenagers. And the only punishment now for lawless behavior in this city most of the time is just the act of being arrested. That's it. Because again, there's no jail time. But arresting people and releasing them, that's not enough to clean up our streets. And as we're learning, many of these teenage gangsters have multiple prior offenses, which has indeed led to them getting arrested, but hasn't led to them changing their behavior in any manner. They're still doing the same things they were doing before they got arrested, revealing that that in and of itself isn't really a big deal to people who are intent on going down the road of crime. And the fact that people who one day are in a classroom and the next day are in a basement plotting with other gang members are getting sucked into this just goes to show you that New York City's getting very close to a point that it may not be able to backtrack from. Because if we don't have a system of law enforcement that intervenes in a person's life right when they get started going off course, and we allow them to remain off course for decades, how are they gonna ever course correct? The only life some people are gonna know is a life of crime. Is that what's happening in our city? Is our problem that we won't put the bad guys in jail? And what do you think should happen to the teenagers who had an altercation with the former governor who's 70 years old? Let me know what you think. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.